Thompson Productions.
Things are going to start happening to me now.
I think Tyler is amazing.
And I'm a fan of this show. I've watched several episodes.
Thank you, Tyler. Thank you, Tyler. You stink, Tyler.
Never promise crazy a baby.
Oh, I like that. That's a cool idea.
Are either of you homosexuals?
I go both ways. What do you think?
You mean like flaming or?
No, we're not homosexual, but we are willing to learn.
But I do wonder, for others, in other cases, whether libertarianism today is just an excuse for many on the right to act selfishly.
Look at me. And then some fat asses in Washington started having opinions. The Olympic Committee started having opinions. You bitch, I know you. You started writing your opinions.
And it just makes me wonder, you're dead, bitch. You know, why are you doing this to this poor guy?
I don't care. I'm a libertarian. What I'm getting is,
Did you vote for Joe Jorgensen or Trump?
Who?
Joe Jorgensen. That was the perfect answer. Thank you. That
We are live, everybody. LPR, this is Tyler Yonke. We've got another interview tonight. It is going to be along the lines of, and Mary and I were just spoiling who the guest is here. We're just talking backstage, as they say. Is this the Leo Frank case? Is this the Mary Phagan case? But it's a fascinating little issue that we've had. We've talked about it. I've done multiple things. You can look at my playlist. A series of these discussions. It was on Nephilim Death Squad. But I am very, very honored to have Mary Phagan-Kean, and I will let her introduce who she is, why that's interesting in this case. But we're going to talk about Mary Phagan, the murderer in 1913, Leo Frank, and then the ADL and what all this is about. Mary, thank you and welcome to the show. Can you introduce yourself for us, everybody?
Sure. My name is Mary Phagan-Kean, and this is probably unusual for me, but I am the great niece and namesake of little Mary Phagan, who was raped and murdered by Leo Frank, who was also convicted for her murder in 1913. I never introduced myself as that. I would just say I'm Mary Phagan-Kean, but I think this is a special time to say how I'm related so people can understand. So little Mary was my grandfather's sister.
Okay. And yeah. So we're going to talk about this case specifically. I got into this. It was several years ago and people started talking about it. And I decided, you know what, I'm going to look into it. Because what I don't like, and I kind of, is when you start having, politically, either left or right or what have you, and they start to glom onto a topic and they use it for their own instance and they're perhaps wrong. It bothers me. And as I told you, I'm an attorney. So I started to look into this and it was fascinating. The first thing I read was Governor Slayton's, breakdown of basically, the commutation. And I was like, oh, okay, so maybe this guy wasn't so innocent or guilty. And then I looked into it further and it was astounding. So I know, and by the way, I think, Mary, you've written a book. Why don't you tell us, first of all, how you're kind of brought into this, where the book, there's so much here. I don't even actually know where to go, but your involvement and maybe how you even decided to start writing a book.
Well, I actually started writing the book with my dad. We decided that I did it on my own. I'm sorry, I put my hands up. I did it on my own, and Dad, and I sent it to publishers to see if anybody was interested in it, because it had been just coming up all the time ever since I found out about the story when I was 13. So there was like 4 publishing companies that were interested in it, and I went with a very small company out of New York. And it was just wonderful. I mean, they treated us professionally. They treated us with kindness. And ironically, at the time that my book was published, the miniseries came out, The Murder of Mary Phagan.
Is that with Jack Lemmon?
Yes, that's the one with Jack Lemmon, and that's the worst thing that ever was made besides Parade, I'll tell you that. So we tried to get involved with NBC, and they wouldn't have anything to do with me. They just cut it out. But actually, for me, it was great because it sold all, the book sold out. I mean, because they were a small publishing. So for them, that was a great honor to have that book completely sold out for them. It was amazing how Atlanta pulled around and absolutely despised and hated that miniseries. And they felt it was an insult to the citizens of Georgia that they were portraying the case, the Mary Phagan case, like they had. So nothing about that movie is true, except for the names of the people and the dates. Mary was murdered, Leo Frank was convicted, and Leo Frank was lynched by Vigilance Committee. Those are the only things that were true in the whole thing. The characters changed. There was no singing in the church and all that.
Yeah.
But I can explain how that happened and why it happened that way. I was lucky and fortunate that someone had a copy of the, what do they call that? A script, the movie script, and they sent it to me. And I discovered through research, I'm a very good researcher, and discovered that was A Little Girl is Dead by Harry Golden's 1965 book. Even the names were misspelled the same. So we knew where they would get it. And of course, my book just came out, so nobody really had read my book, so they didn't know what I was really talking about or who I was and why was I doing this. And my rationale was that it was starting to get that to where we are drifting away from it being the Mary Phagan case to the Leo Frank case. And Leo Frank is not the victim. She was the victim, and
Absolutely.
I want to keep it that way. And because also recently, in recent years, several authors who have written, who are considered historians, started to smear little Mary Phagan and saying that she was promiscuous, she was flirtatious, she liked to tease boys. It was just horrible for us because she was only 13 years old, and she was very well protected by my grandfather. She was not that way at all. And if you look at the style of clothing, she was dressed very appropriately for her age. You know, she was, as my great grandmother said, she was busty, but she had not reached puberty, which meant she had not gotten her menstrual cycle.
Well, let's just put this out there. First of all, she's 13 years old at the time of her murder. So I don't care what development or anything. 13 is, you're not going, I'm sorry. And it's probably Dinnerstein or Olney that wrote this in the book. Is that who you're referring to?
Yes, several of the authors. And Alpha Marie Lipkin, she wrote a book, something for students, and it's all in there. It just, you know, they just parrot each other. They don't go back and do any original research. That's the issue I have with these historians, quote historians. Ironically, and I think people should be aware, the historians that we talk about or that are considered to be the experts are the same religious faith as Leo Frank. And I just have to say that. I'm not Jewish. Steve Oney's not Jewish, but his wife is Jewish. So I consider him part of that group anyway. So
yeah. And by the way, that's what's a fascinating little. And by the way, you said you had watched because you reached out, you had seen my breakdown, and all I'm doing is reviewing. I looked at some of your book, Steve Olney, Dinnerstein, and but the majority of the work I really had done was off of which is crazy to me, the Nation of Islam. I think their book was volume 3 here, the relationship of blacks and Jews, was hands down just fascinating research, because they dictate of like where it's coming from, and you can look at this. What was interesting then to me was, and just to kind of break off a point there, is the work that they did showing that a lie is started somewhere, or just some sort of made up thing. And then the follow on is like the research quotes this one, and it just, it's almost circular in their citations.
yes, I wrote I put it in the back of the book, but I wrote something in the back supporting the facts of the case, and it was historical accuracy, and the sources were just phenomenal. Most people don't have that in their books. They don't care to go and dwell anything. They're just going to parrot another book. For example, that's exactly what Leonard Dinnerstein did with his book regarding the research that he did about the crowds and hang the mob and all that. He did not go back. He just quoted Harry Golden, who Harry Golden said that. And that was inaccurate. You know what I'm saying? It gets so confusing. Who's parroting who? But what I found interesting during COVID, because I did a lot of research, because I had decided that I'm gonna write it. There's enough here that I need to update, and added 16 chapters. So that tells you a lot. 1987. It's a lot of chapters to add about it, keep going on and what's happening with it. But the one book that really started the revisionism of this Mary Phagan case was in 1956, and it was, let me get my little book here. It's not called Night Fell on Georgia. And it's by Charles and Louise Samuels. And they're the ones that start with hang the Jew or we'll hang you. There were crowds on top of rooftops so that the jury could hear them saying that. This is the book that started it, and this is the book that everybody, and this book has no footnotes. It's just a story, so there's no sources to verify any of this. So when I discovered that, I thought, wow, okay, that's where it started from. And then every book after that prints some of what they say in here. And that's really sad that they did that, because they're not going back to the original research. You cannot study the Mary Phagan case unless you go back to the original documentation in 1913. You can't pick up a Harry Golden book. You can't pick up a Steve Only book. You've got to go back and decide for yourself and look at it. The sad part is the trial transcript is no longer available and became not available in 1965 when Leonard Dennerstein and Harry Golden were researching for the case here in Atlanta. And when their researchers left, there was no trial transcript. All we have left is a brief of evidence. The questions that come from, that I do in my book now, I was glad to see it, come from the 1913 original articles from the three newspapers in Atlanta, the Georgian, the Journal, and the Constitution. They're the ones that gave daily commentary and actually gave the questions and the response of each witness. And that's where you got to go back. But who wants to read a 1913 paper?
Right.
You know, I tried. I couldn't do it. It was horrible. I was using a magnifying glass trying to figure out and decipher it. So this is kind of going off the subject, but in 2019, I decided to do a website, and I got a team of members, and we decided to transcribe the newspapers. And that's why there's no excuse for any person that's writing a book on this not to go back to those original series.
What is the website with that on there?
Oh, I'm sorry, littlemaryphagan.com.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's also I have a free copy of my first book on there that if you want to just get started on it and look at it, you can still download it for at no cost. I'm not out to make money. I just need the truth to be told.
Well, one, you should be making some money. So I went out and I actually bought your new book. So people should give some money to this because it's fascinating. So you make some interesting comments there. One is when I'd heard you on Jake Shields, and this was the first time I kind of had realized this, which is I had looked at the brief of evidence, and there's a voluminous amount of case filings and whatnot that are out there. I didn't realize the original transcripts had been deleted. I just was like, and I hadn't looked super deep for that, but it was odd, which is it's just the answers, right? They're in court, and it's just the answers, so you don't actually know what the questions are that the attorneys are giving. So why don't you tell us what happened to, or your summation of what you think happened to the original transcripts, and then is the brief of evidence valid and at least good enough for us to move forward? And last thing I'll say is you make a great point also about this was a time where we had newspapers. So when anybody is talking about, the hang the Jew and all this stuff, you can go back and read contemporaneous comments at the time from Atlanta in the newspapers and what they actually were reporting, and this was just not happening. It wasn't a hang the Jew type of thing situation. Anyway, so talk to us about the brief of evidence and then the contemporaneous news as well.
So in 1965, I forgot to tell you, I'm a military brat.
Okay.
My daddy was in the Air Force, so my growing up years were Japan and Hawaii.
Oh, okay.
So when we came back, and we were in 65, so I had no idea what about the story at all.
So you had grown up not knowing, even though that was your name, you had not grown up with much knowledge at all about that. When did you first kind of figure?
Yeah. Okay. When I found out that I was related, I was 13, ironically, the age that Mary was murdered.
Oh, okay.
Now, you've got to realize my dad was married to my mother for 14 years, and she didn't know either until I came home. So I went to three different high schools I just went to three different high schools, and one of them is R.B. Stahl High School in Charleston, South Carolina, Air Force Base. My science teacher, he lined us all up, and we had to give our name, and I went by and I said, Mary Phagan. He just never looked at anybody, but he looked at me and put his pen down and pencil and said, there was a little girl in Atlanta that was murdered in the 1920s. Are you by chance related to her? And I said, I don't know. And well, I didn't. I didn't
Yeah.
know. I said, so anyway, now I'm 13. I was traumatized. The boy started saying I was dead and reincarnated. And it just really upset me. And I cried all the way home because back then we walked to school and we went home for lunches and
Yeah.
stuff. So I went home and Daddy happened to be there, which was a blessing because he was always flying. And I told him, I said, you know, who's the little girl that was Mary Phagan that was murdered according to my science teacher, Mr. Henry? And he totally lost it. He just, the tears would come and he just turned white as white can be. I mean, he basically just told me a couple things. He said, she was your great aunt. You go back tomorrow and you tell Mr. Henry that yes, you are related and you were named after her. And he named her after me and two grandmothers, his great grandmother, which is Mary's mother, Frances, and my mother's mother, which was named Frances. So I was named Mary Frances Phagan. And he said, you go back and you say, yes, you are related. I said, okay. And I said, what happened? And he said, she was murdered by Leo Frank. He was convicted and a vigilance committee lynched him. That's all he said in 1913. That's it. I'm 13. I know I'll never be asked that question again. Wrong. Wrong. I've been asked that question all my life, believe it or not, except for the first time tonight when I introduced myself as that, because I don't do that. I only talk about it if somebody asks me the questions. The question, you know, are you by chance related? And like I said, it happened even in my career, everything. So, and we went to Shamrock High School in Atlanta. We moved to Atlanta to be near my grandfather, who was Mary's brother. And he wasn't doing so well, so Daddy said we need to get to know him and everything. Could never talk to him about it. He would break down. He just couldn't do it. And Daddy knew a little bit, but, you know, it was just oral history that I was hearing. But the first day of school in Shamrock, all 6 teachers asked me if I was related to little Mary Phagan. And of course, I said
now
yes.
you were in Atlanta.
I'm in Atlanta.
Yeah.
And I said, yes, I am. Wow, they went. And then I'm very inquisitive. And at 15, I was like, there's more to this story than what my daddy told me. So, of course, you know what I did. I went back home and I pounded him with questions. And that's when it all came out. And he told me a lot about her being raped and that Leo Frank was a sexual pervert. Made me get the dictionary so I could define sexual pervert. Because I didn't know what a sexual pervert was. I was grown up in a great time. We didn't have all this stuff that we have today, you know. So that's what happened. And I just started research when I turned age 15. And so that's what I did. Dad and I, every summer, we went, when I was 15, 16, and 17, we went to Georgia State University and looked at all the microfiche. And then we copied all the articles that we wanted to keep. And that's how I started my collection of 57 years.
So tell me about the trial, the brief of evidence. So,
the brief of evidence.
And totally fine with what your answer was there, but I am curious about what happened. Like I said, I didn't realize that until you had mentioned it on Jake Schildt's show.
Yeah, it disappeared according to Daddy because I was, like I said, 65. I was only 10 years old and I was in Hawaii at the time. So I didn't know and Daddy didn't know at that time. But they came down, Leonard Steen and Golden, and they each had a team of researchers. And they were all sharing the information. And somehow in the midst of everything, the trial transcript walked out of the facility and has never been seen since. However, there was what they call a brief of evidence. It is a summary of each person's testimony. You don't have the questions, but you have their testimony. And it's like 485 pages long, and it has all the exhibits and everything in it. And my dad purchased that because it was still available. And he said, I think we need to have this for future use. So those were my first pieces of evidence in my collection, was the brief of evidence. When I came back to Charleston at Shamrock, that's what he did when I was at Shamrock High, when I came home the second time and asked about Mary. He bought that for me so I could start studying the case. And then he gave me the book, A Little Girl is Dead. And what I was reading and what that book said were two different things. And I didn't understand. Why was it so different? And Dad said, well, that's when we got to go get the newspapers. So we went every summer, like I said. And the mimeograph from those newspapers, original, the Journal-Constitution and Georgian, are in the collection at Georgia State now. I donated my collection, by the way. I didn't want it to die. I don't think my nephew needs to take the responsibility that I've had to take for 57 years.
Yeah.
You know, and he agreed, and the family agreed. We talked about it, but he's really just a great person, and asked me, said, but Aunt Mary, I want the original picture of Mary. I want the original pictures of the family at the grave. I want the picture of the lynching. I want your autograph books and your book collection. So I did leave those to him because he requested those. I have the record from Fiddling John Carson. I framed it like a gold record for my dad for Christmas one year because I found the original record, the Ballad of Mary Phagan. And so that was kind of nice, but that's what you have to do. But the brief of evidence is very important, and it's very critical for me because it had all that supplemental information about the exhibits, what were exactly presented there. And it made me question things when they showed the exhibits. You know, they showed exhibits of Leo Frank's, all his stuff that he did for the pencil company and what he had to do. That was totally irrelevant to me. That was his testimony. Well, that was his testimony and some other things, but that was totally irrelevant. So the brief of evidence made me have a clearer mind and wanted me to research even more. Then when I read the original newspapers and we were able to copy them and bring them home, then it started clicking how much was just right out propaganda and lies by the Jewish community. And that there was no anti-Semitism. He was not convicted because of anti-Semitism. He was convicted because he was a sexual pervert, and our word today is pedophile.
Yes, completely. And a few things here. First of all, it seems to me that so he wasn't charged, as an example, with rape. You've mentioned rape a few times, and I know looking through there, the coroner in the autopsy, there was some question as to whether she had been raped or not. Definitely, I would say digitally penetrated. What's your stance? Because you've obviously said rape a few times. Yes. Is that you feel pretty confident that took place as well, rather than him just like coming on to her and her rebuffing? Yes. Okay.
Yes. What they said that she did have, what the autopsy report said, or actually the autopsy report is Dr. Harris's testimony. So I have that in the book so people could read that and see what he said about it. They said there was menstrual blood or blood in her panties. Well, Governor Slayton, who you mentioned earlier in his conversation, said it was her menstrual cycle, but yet she had not reached puberty. So you know what that means. She didn't have a menstrual cycle, according to my great-grandmother.
And by the way, can you tell me what, maybe you don't even know, why would he say that? What's his proof? Because I felt that his breakdown, what he says one line in the end, which is something to the fact that, you know, he's still guilty, but why did he even, where did he get that evidence? Do you have any idea?
The detectives said that there was
Slayton.
Slayton read the detectives, and he went and read everything. So,
did they mention that it was menstrual cycle? I mean,
yeah, he did. He mentioned it. It was her menstrual cycle. He said it was her menstrual.
But where did he get that from? Do you have any idea?
From the autopsy report, because there was blood in her panties.
Okay, but it doesn't. And once again, it doesn't mention that it's specifically.
They're saying she wasn't a virgin. In other words,
yeah.
You know, usually, if you're a virgin, I mean, most women will tell you what we do. We bleed the first time. So, my daddy said that if she was on her menstrual cycle, and I did the research of what kind of protection did women wear during that time, and he was correct. She would have had a cloth with 2 pins attached to her panties if it was her menstrual cycle. So I dispute that. Terribly, yes. She was not on her menstrual cycle. She was raped, and she was a virgin. And I can't remember what year it was, but the ADL did finally admit that she was raped.
Oh, well, but they say it's Conley or someone else, of course.
Yes.
And let's talk about that. So anyway, the trial brief or the actual transcripts are gone. You think maybe it's Dinnerstein or some of these others, I guess, that took it. Did they was it just laziness, incompetence on their part that this just walked away, or was there some other reason that you think that this happened?
My father told me that he thought the reason is that it showed that Leo Frank was definitely 100% guilty, and that's why they took the transcripts.
Interesting.
Because they never print any of the questions. The ADL won't. They never tell you a lot of things. They never tell you that Leo Frank accused 3 people and accused them of possibly being the murderer of Mary Phagan before he was even considered. And 2 were Negroes, or colored as they called them back then, and 1 was a Phagan family friend that knew her very well.
Who was the Phagan family friend? Because maybe I don't recall that right away. Who's the
John Gant?
Okay, that's right. What's fascinating to me is that the first person you would think of if you're, Leo Frank innocent, is Conley, right? Not not the night watchman, but he couldn't really pin the finger on Conley, and maybe you could explain why he didn't do that until it came out that Conley said, "I was there."
Well, Leo Frank, when the detectives came, they had a punch clock for Newt Lee's time, and he said it was accurate. And he was trying to frame Newt Lee first. But when he came back the next day, Leo Frank changed the time record. You never hear about that. So that's when the detectives are getting their suspicions, and that's why they went to Leo Frank first, of course, then Leo Frank said, "Oh, Jim Gant, John Gant, he knows Mary Phagan very well." And so he tried to pin it on him. He actually went in prison. I mean, these 3 men went in prison, because of his statements, but you never hear about that. He accused 3 other people, and then Jim Conley came later. And the other thing people need to know is that when they had the grand jury, Jim Conley did not give any testimony. And the grand jury had 5 people that were of the same religious faith as Leo Frank, and they voted 21-0 that he should be held for murder, for a trial for murder of Mary Phagan by strangulation.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe we can look at the when the newspapers really got involved and the North really got involved.
Oh God!
And I've talked about that with Ox and whatnot. The New York Times really coming in. There's comments after the fact of how they thought he was a sexual pervert. Leo Frank, that is. So this was really about saving face for, sorry to be blunt here, the Jewish religion in a sense, in this case. Why do you think this is perpetuated for so many years beyond this, rather than just saying this was just a one gross guy that happened to be in our community? Why is it so necessary to rehabilitate this gentleman?
Because his lynching founded the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith. And of course, I know they've separated now, and it's just ADL. And Leo Frank was very high in the B'nai B'rith, whatever that's called, in Atlanta. He was president, and they were respecting him. What happened too, I think I'd like to mention about the New York Times. The New York Times didn't give a hoot about this trial. When you go back and look at how many articles they wrote about it, it was 5 to 7 articles that they had. Grand jury indicted him
during the time.
During the time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, they didn't care one bit until he was convicted, and his rabbi went to Aldous Ox and said he was convicted because of anti-Semitism. So then he contacted Albert Lasker in Chicago, the philanthropist, and he funded everything, and he was going to prove that he was given money to make sure that he was proven innocent. Even though those 2 men felt that Leo Frank was guilty, they said that he was like a homosexual or a sexual pervert. They knew it too, but they still did it that way. Why it continues today is I think the ADL just has to, save their face, and they just won't let it go. They won't accept the truth that he was guilty and that he was a sexual pervert. And you would think they would, because in my opinion, he's the first. He's the first Jewish convicted sexual pervert pedophile in our country. Because look what happened to the guy in Nevada. They sent him back to Israel.
Yes.
They didn't even give him a trial. I mean, at least my family got a trial.
Yeah.
That poor family gets nothing.
It's one of the most, when you really look into it, and what I've tried to do is put into context the time period. We're talking about 1913, and I think what the ADL has really done here, and it's devious. And my last thing that I did with Top Lobster and Daniel David was really to try to show that the ADL, the Jews in general in the South and the KKK were not at odds. You think of them now, they are very much, okay, yeah, we're at odds, but it was not the case then. So it's really interesting, and it's almost devious the way that they're like, hey, look back. of course, Jews and the KKK are at odds. This is how it started because of Leo Frank, because of all this stuff that's, gone on. And it's so anyway, I don't know what their end game is, but they have not stopped at all to put the boot on the throat, essentially, of the Phagan family, is the way I feel about it.
Yes, and the KKK was not revived because of the lynching of Leo.
Yes.
And you very well said that, and the Knights of Mary Phagan never existed. That came 6 weeks from a New York Times newspaper article saying that that Atlanta was getting like anxious, and there was people calling, and they called themselves Knights of Mary Phagan. When you read the original newspaper accounts here in Atlanta, it says Vigilance Committee. It does not say Knights of Mary Phagan. And you were correct in your assessment on that. And I was like, yes, okay. You understand that, it was not, his lynching was not the revival of the KKK. Like you said, it was the movie, The Birth of a Nation. Now, there were two people on Stone Mountain in November that were part of the Vigilance Committee, but it was not the entire Vigilance Committee up on Stone Mountain. It was only 2 people.
Well, and it's just a devious way, I think, of trying to perpetuate this and, going back in time to do this. Okay, so that's what it is. However, and by the way, once again, I'm going to just keep mentioning people should check this book out because the Murder of Little Mary Phagan by Mary Phagan-Kean, who is my guest here right now, who did an updated version. This thing is packed full of details. And you've gone through, just done some painstaking research, and it's been your family's life, so it makes sense. But there's a lot of personal information in here about your personal association with the ADL and some of that. So can you describe when that situation, when they started to reach out to you and your first initial reaction? Because I don't know if you first felt that they were such an antagonistic force. You tell me, what do you think?
They were not. That was not our original. It started in the 70s when we were when we moved back, like when we moved definitely to Atlanta. And my father, people would come to the home and everything, and the ADL contacted my father, Stuart Lewingrub, Charles Wintenstein, and what was that woman's name? I can't remember her name off the bat, but I know it's in the book. Yeah. She contacted Daddy and was saying that there was a movement I guess the correct word is Nazis. I'm not sure. I mean, but they were trying to do a Remember Mary Phagan Day. That's what they wanted to do. And they were concerned about the Phagan family's point of view about that. And so Daddy did take me in when we went and met with them. And Daddy would call them if there was something questionable because we had a good relationship with them. And they were very gracious and very kind. We didn't have anything, but, time changes everything. So the next kind of group that followed the Pearsons, that when they passed and they took over, it changed. And now they just, they don't want anything to do with the Phagan family. And so we don't have anything to do with them. I know I was even called in by an attorney one time. I'm sure you read that too. He wanted to know where did we stand on the lynching and, the extrajudicial lynching and stuff like that. And we said, of course, we're against it. But, it happened. We can't change it. What do you want us to do? Yeah,
that it's not like you guys put a hit out on Leo Frank. You weren't even around at the time. So you have to understand everything in context with that. Okay, so they've reached out to you. They've wanted to get some ideas of touchy feely at least with your family. But obviously that's changed over time. There's the big thing with Alonzo Mann, the Tennessean commutation that started with Slayton, but now there's a pardon issue. So what's your take on all of that?
It started, you're correct, in 1982 when Alonzo Mann came forward with the Tennessean, the Nashville Tennessean, and the Jewish groups, the Atlanta Jewish Federation, the American Jewish Committee. I'm rolling my eyes up to think of, and who else was it? They came forward and said to the governor that they wanted Leo Frank to be exonerated. So none of those people ever contacted our family at all. It was like we were totally isolated. And the sad part about it is, and the hurtful part is, that everything was done in secrecy. They met behind closed doors, and it's completely, my last newsletter I did, which is in the book at the last couple pages, says shame on Georgia for the political corruption that they have done with this case for the last 112 years, because they let this continue on and on and on. And they should never have taken this case at all, the Mary Phagan case. It should have just been done. They should have said, no, it's been 100 years or whatever it was. No, it wasn't 100 years back then, but they shouldn't have done it. So that changed the atmosphere of everything within our family, because they did do the Alonzo Man thing. And they were, Alonzo Man was guaranteed book rights, movie rights, everything. I mean, they were sure it was going to happen. Well, in 1983, the board said no. Of course, we were elated, and they were not. And then everybody, the state of Georgia, you should be ashamed. The Georgia Pardons and Parole Board, they shouldn't have been ashamed. They did the right thing. That man's evidence was not evidence that cleared Leo Frank. And if you look, too bad I don't have my collection, but I wish I could show it to you. But I have copies of Alonzo Man's testimony on the lie detector test. And I have to tell you, if I were those lawyers, I'd be ashamed of myself for how they coerced him.
So why don't you tell us first about who Alonzo Man is?
Okay.
And then we can talk about his testimony, because he was a young kid.
Yes, he was 13.
Okay, so Mary's age. At the time of the murder, he testified. And then later on, he recants this, but he's an old man. It doesn't make sense at the time that you would even be, okay. So why don't you start with his testimony and then his later, and did you meet him?
I did.
Okay.
I did. I met him. I think there's a picture of us in the book.
I thought so. So start with his testimony, if you can recall any of that, what he was saying, and then move forward.
You want to know how I found out?
Yeah.
I had a secretary from one of my schools. I'm a former educator. I taught students with visual impairments, deafblind, and the guide dogs thing. So anyway, Miss Youngblood called me and she said, Mary, you need to turn on the news. Quick, 11 Alive. Quick, hurry, turn it on now. I said, what's going on, Sue? What's going on? She goes, it's about Mary Phagan, little Mary Phagan. Turn it on. So I turned it on, and there they had this elderly man, like you said, in his 80s. And he said he was the office boy of Leo Frank. What he didn't tell you was that he was the only office boy for 2 weeks. He only worked 2 Saturdays. And that he said that he saw Jim Conley with the body of Mary Phagan on the first floor, which contradicts what was said at the trial. So, I mean, it was crazy. It was just craziness, everything. Well, the Phagan family has been very quiet due to the silence of my great-grandmother. I told my daddy, I got him on the phone, and I said, Daddy, turn TV on. And he said, oh, my God. He said, you've got to be kidding me. He said, this is unreal. I said, Daddy, what's the problem is that nobody knows we exist. They don't even know I exist. And I'm still Mary Phagan at that time. So he said, well, you're right. And I said, I think we need to call somebody and let them know that we're around and that we have some concerns about what the Jewish community is doing. Oh, it's the ADL. The other one was the ADL. And he said, okay, what do you think? He said, well, if you want to do it, do it. So I called one of the board members, because there was a newspaper article in there, and gave me his name, and I called him. And he thought I was joking, because I said, my name is Mary Phagan. And he just said, oh, this is such a joke. This is just not real at all. I said, no, sir. My name is Mary Phagan. I'm the great niece and namesake, again, of little Mary Phagan. I'm related to little Mary Phagan. I'm the great niece. And he just got real quiet. He said, we were told there was no Phagan family involvement at all. And I said, well, you're wrong. So I asked him, I said, we're never told of anything ahead of time. And the media takes everything and just runs with it and starts printing it out. And we're the last people to know. Is it possible to give us a call to let us know if an application has been accepted by the Georgia Pardons and Parole Board? And he said yes. So later on, they did do that, and they called us and said that it had been accepted. And that was when the first one was turned down. So then during the research, though, the time again, and this is an update in the book, I found out that after that pardon was announced, that the Georgia Pardons Paroles Boards, all the members, met in secret with those Jewish committee groups and the ADL and a young man by the name of Clark Freshman who was writing a thesis about Leo Frank. And that's where that pardon came out, without addressing guilt or innocence. That was his whole pardon, that he can get a pardon because he was not protected by the state of Georgia and was lynched. That's how it came about. But, you know, I mean, when they announced the pardon, they called us in the day before and told us they were going to announce to the media that they were giving Leo Frank a pardon.
Were there two pardon attempts? Because
Yes.
it seemed like there was one and they just outright said no.
Right,
And then
that
they buckled on the second one, which, by the way, if you look at that, it's very obvious. They're saying it's a posthumous pardon because
Yes.
we didn't protect him. And by the way, my legal looking at this, just real, not in depth, but just surface level, is you can't pardon someone who's not alive. So
Thank you.
yeah.
Thank
So
you. That's
there's-
what our family said.
well, so there's a problem there.
Yes.
But then the fact that they did posthumously pardon him for not protecting him. Okay, that's what it is. But there's no innocence or guilt, written into there. But then you see the ADL just outright say there's a pardon, and they don't explain
Jonathan
it.
Greenblatt does it every year at
Yes.
the date of his lynching, and said he was given a pardon. So to bring you up to date on some new stuff that's in the
Yes,
book,
I want to hear that.
so maybe it'll excite some people about this, is in 1994, and it's about the pardon. In 1994, the Marietta City Cemetery, the Parks and Recreations, decided they were going to do historical markers. And they chose 8 people that they felt that needed to have a historical marker in the cemetery. And one of them was little Mary Phagan's grave.
Okay.
And my dad said, no, I don't want it. We don't need it. I don't want, he was fearful. It's made of marble. He didn't want anybody destroying it. He was, nobody has, I will tell you that. We have never, I just see beautiful teddy bears and money and pebbles and stones and flowers. And it's wonderful when I go visit the grave and see all the way the people remember her by. So my dad did agree to it. And I think it's chapter 15 where I said the marker, if you want to turn to it. And you can read what the original marker said. But anyway, in 1995, a rabbi by the name of Stephen LeBeau, got up in front of a group of people and demanded that that marker be taken down, that it was offensive to the Jewish community. So, and we didn't know at the time, again, this is done in secret. Nobody tells us anything. The media didn't say anything about it, had no knowledge of it. I didn't put this in the book because I was honoring someone who passed. But she called me and told me that I needed to go clean the cemetery. So I tell everybody I went to go clean the cemetery, which I did, but she told me you need to go clean the cemetery. Check the cemetery out, see if Mary's grave needs to be cleaned. I said, okay. I go there. And they changed the marker.
And what did they change it to?
They changed it to the ending where Leo Frank was given a pardon, whereas the first one said without addressing his guilt or innocence. It did not address his guilt or innocence. He was issued a pardon without addressing his guilt or innocence. And they completely changed the marker to get their own thing. And that was totally illegal in my book and everybody's book. The Marietta City, the newspaper went crazy, the Marietta Daily Journal, saying this is not right. They didn't have any meetings. Philip Goldstein and this rabbi, and they put pressure on Mr. Dan Cox, who was the City Parks and Recreation Director, to change that marker, and they changed it incognito in the middle of the night. They went in there and changed the marker. There is something wrong with that. That just doesn't happen, Yeah, sure, it's off of our cemetery, our plot. So, ironically, in 2016, when everybody passed, because I knew I couldn't do it when they were alive, I put my own marker up by Mary's grave and talked about Mary. And told and wrote a little bit more about it. And I said I do have some errors in there. They put John instead of Joshua, and for my great grandfather's name. And Knights of Mary Phagan is in there, and that was before I found out and did all this research when the COVID happened.
Yeah.
So now I've got to go back. I'm thinking about maybe putting a QR thing on there and saying that these are incorrect, or maybe putting up something new, or something. But and I just said that pardon does not absolve Leo Frank of his innocence. So. I had to do something. My heart kept telling me, you've got to do something about that. That is just so wrong to have that there.
Well, it's obviously, when your family's being, this is what's crazy, which is they seem to have a problem with, like, it's offensive to have a marker up if it's just about Mary, right?
Right.
Which,
Oh, yeah.
Let's say Connolly did it. Why, what does she have to do with any of this? It's, once again, it's a 13-year-old girl. She wasn't doing something that they were defending themselves. And so there's no offense to commemorating the life, in a sense, of Mary Phagan, unless you have an ulterior motive that you can't have any positivity from this event because it really is the Leo Frank issue. It's
become the Leo
telling.
Frank case, and he's the victim, and it's just not going well with me at all.
Yeah, no,
Nor the rest of the family. I will tell you that too. The rest of the family totally supports me on that. So a cute story about the first book, as the elders' families were still alive. The elders were alive back then, and I told them that I wanted to write a book, and they told me, no, you're not writing that book. No, we don't want it. You don't talk about it. No, but I have to. No, you're not. So I went to the cemetery one day, and it was drizzly out there. It was cloudy and drizzly, and I'm sitting at Mary's grave, and I'm looking at the grave, and I said, "What am I supposed to do? Is this something that you want me to do? What? Help me here." And just as I said that, the sun came out and shined on her name, and I knew I had to write the book. So I went back to the elders, who were very religious, and I told them that God told me, and Mary told me, that I needed to write the book. And I told them the story, and my grandmother patted me on my knee, and she said, "Yes, this is something you must do for all of us."
Well, good for you for coming along, because I mean, each your own. The family doesn't want to talk about it. Do you know why they didn't want to have any conversation? Okay, too painful, rather than because there isn't a scar necessarily on your family.
No.
Yeah,
but it is in her memory, and the way she was just a beautiful little girl.
Yeah.
And she was just a little girl, and they're trying to make her out to be a woman. And she's no woman at age 13.
No.
I think about me being 13, 14, 15. I didn't know anything.
Yeah. So I have 4 kids, and the youngest now is 19. But, it's not so long ago that they were 13. So I could definitely understand. What is your take? Because the research and the reading that I've done is, at the time, putting, the 1913, putting girls back into the factory. This was a play between the North and the South, Northerners coming down. You have Leo Frank running this factory. And to put your daughter in a factory, I mean, one of the comments was, you're almost like, I don't know, prostituting them out, but you're putting them in a position where they're going to be sexually harassed a lot. Anything that you've found in your research that would support that, or that hey, it was commonplace?
Yeah, it was a sweat factory. That's what they called them, and it was. I say the war between the states. I still say that because that's what it was. I don't say the Civil War. I say the war between the states.
It's a good Southern girl right there saying the war between the states.
I became Southern after I moved back down to Georgia.
Right.
Or should I say Georgia? Anyway, but I believe that's what happened. And what happened was my great grandmother remarried in 1912 to Mr. Coleman, and so they had to move. And so back then you had to have what you call a seat in school. So this is the story my dad told me, that you had to have a seat in school, and she couldn't get a seat, so that's why she went to work at the pencil factory.
Oh, interesting.
And then he told me right before she was murdered that she quit because she was telling great-grandmother that Leo Frank was really starting to bother her. Although I couldn't find, the Pickerington Point reports, I don't think they say anything like that. My family just didn't say anything. I didn't understand that part, but
because there was no testimony that from her mother, essentially. Her mother testified.
Yes.
And she didn't say anything like that there had been any contact, or that she had mentioned Leo Frank, right?
No, they did not ask that question.
Okay. Well, I guess.
Wasn't asked.
Right.
So that's why you got to read it, because, this is a grieving mother here.
Yeah.
A 13-year-old child that was raped and murdered horribly. So anyway, she didn't get the seat, like I said, in school, so she went to the pencil factory. And then Dad said that, it was just a time of transition between the South and the North. And it became a mini war between the states, newspaper-wise, everything. The sensationalism was done by the newspapers, and it mostly came from the North, riling up us. They didn't care. They didn't write anything, none of those newspapers, Chicago, Atlanta. And like I said, they didn't have any interest in this case. So it was after the trial that anti-Semitism came to play into the story, as well as the North and the South with the sensationalism of the newspapers. The newspapers in Atlanta, to me, in my opinion, they just reported what happened. And now everybody tells me it's yellow journalism. Well, we got yellow journalism today. It's just, it's just something that was their only means of learning anything about it. So, I don't see anything wrong with what they wrote or what they shared. Or, yeah, a lot of it was, okay, oh, then Jim Conley this, or Leo Frank this. I will tell you that the 2 times anti-Semitism did pop up in the trial was Leo Frank's mother.
Yeah.
Yeah. She got up and said something really mean to the the prosecutor. And, he was solicitor, I think. And said, and neither did you Gentile dog. And that's the first time it was implied. Let's put it that way. And the second time it was implied was the defense on the last day of the trial tried to get a trolley conductor, George Kinley, to say that he said that if he was on the jury, he would hang that Jew. So that's, and the defense had very, very excellent lawyers. And you know that. They were the best in Atlanta at that time. And and I'm not a lawyer, but I sometimes think like one. And I thought, I finally figured out what their defense was after all these years. White privilege.
Well, by the way, that's just obvious. But I didn't even know if it's, that was just stated at the time, which is, their gall of this is why this case is open and shut, in my opinion, as well, is 1913. And I always have to just bring it back to the context. It's 1913. A black man does not get it. You used to have Jim Crow laws. People were getting lynched for testifying or pointing out a white person. And you had 2 black men, Newt Lee and Jim Conley, come in there and testify, Conley for multiple days. And the jury is like, yeah, we're believing this over this upstanding Jewish white guy, because that's literally how they thought him at the time. So that is a very important part to have in there. What's fascinating as well, though, is that you talk about the white privilege. They literally did something that is detrimental, because you can't bring character into trial, right, as the prosecution. Okay. So but you can, to rebut character evidence, is brought in by the defense. And the defense starts to talk about how he's such a great person and he wouldn't do this. And that is where a lot of the appeals kind of stem from as well, was then the prosecution is allowed to bring all these girls in. And, and basically,
and it wasn't just girls. I'll interrupt you.
Okay, we'll talk about that then as well. What did the boys say?
They said they were, admitted that Leo Frank was making advances toward them.
Oh, okay. Do you know what Conley meant by when he said Leo said, I'm not like most men? What do you think he meant? Do you have any predictions on there?
I was just thinking the size of his personal anatomy. Okay. Is that a nice way of saying it? I don't know if I want to say that P word,
Maybe he's a micro penis or something like that.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, I was going to say, but I won't say that. I have a hard time saying that.
I'll say it for you.
Wasn't raised to say that kinds of words.
I understand. Okay. This is my show. We'll say as we need.
Okay.
So anything about the other comments of the girls or the boys, everyone talking about him? How do you think, what's your feeling about that?
I think they told the truth. There was one girl, what is her name? I wish I could remember her name. She was sent to Cincinnati to a school for pregnant girls. And the prosecutors brought her back to testify against Leo Frank. And so what does that make you assume? That he was the father of her, but they would not let her testify about that. Yeah.
There, by the way, just I don't know if this is a legitimate thing. It's a school for pregnant girls. That's literally what it's called.
Yeah, okay. It was in Cincinnati. It was called a Shepherd Home or something like that. Cincinnati Shepherd Home.
Okay.
And she was not allowed to testify about where she lived or anything like that, because that would influence, because everybody knew what that particular place was evidently at that time.
Yeah.
They didn't mention the name of it, but she only could testify about, what did he do to her. And so she had it was not a very awesome testimony, in my opinion, because they were trying to keep it, covered up.
Yeah. And by the way, I'll just say, as an attorney, even back in 1913, as Judge Roan, I think was his name,
yes.
For there were 13 appeals, even one up to the Supreme Court. And I think the only one up to the Supreme Court really talked about mob mentality. Otherwise, it was issues of what I just said about character, allowing Conley to go talk about, some things that The judge has to make sure that this case doesn't get overturned on appeal. Even back then, this is concerns. And so not allowing certain testimony is fine, right? And at some point you want it to be in these prospects of what's going to be allowed so that it doesn't get overturned on appeal, so that someone like Leo Frank gets convicted perfectly fine.
Right. And all 13 appeals, including the Supreme Court, never questioned his guilt.
Yes.
And people don't know that. And the ADL, what they do with that, with Oliver Wendell Holmes, is they don't tell the full story. So this is an interesting book that I came across. It's called, where is it? You see, Guilty or Not Guilty. And it's by, this was a really good book. Francis X. Bush, and it's a man. So the Francis is spelled with an I, mine's with an E. And he talks about the Leo Frank case, and he talks about that. And he's the first person that picks up the revisionism of the case. So, and he said, it was just really amazing how they didn't tell the whole story. And he printed out exactly, word for word, of what Oliver Wendell Holmes said. And so they only put a portion of that in their, when the ADL talks about Oliver Wendell Holmes, they don't put that in there.
By the way, there's the brief of evidence, and then there are also all the appeals, at least the rulings on there. So you can go and read Oliver Wendell Holmes. In case people don't understand, he's a Supreme Court justice. He is famous for making the comment about you can't yell fire in a crowded theater, which was overturned in 1969, I think. So that's not a legitimate thing. And then he did warn about you can't use this later on. I shouldn't have said that. He was the dissenting Supreme Court justice in the Mary Phagan appeal that went up there. And his concern was about the mob mentality and some of that other stuff. So you can read about it. So what did this guy say about that as far as the revisionist part?
Okay, he said the dissenting opinion was written by Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes and concurred in by Chief Justice Hughes, basing their view on the theory that the allegations of the petition were untested. The dissenters felt that the defendant should be permitted to make proof of his contentions, that the atmosphere of prejudice and hostility which surrounded him had infected the jury and made a fair trial impossible. If the allegations were found to be true, it was clear that Frank would have been deprived of his liberty and was about to be deprived of his life without due process of the law in violation of the 14th Amendment. He used vigorous language in expressing this view. The contrary is clear. He said the press and the public lay a statement by him of undisputed facts of the case that they misinterpreted it. He comes right out and says, Justice Holmes, as was his wont, used vigorous language in expressing this view, which was quite generally misinterpreted by the press and the lay public as a statement by him of the undisputed facts of the case. He never reviewed the case. For one thing, I found out, he never reviewed it. And he always used the word alleged. He never said it was factual. The contrary is clearly shown by the petition itself. And then he goes, is whether sufficient to place in the midst of a mob, like you said, savagely and manifest intently on a single road. Well, if he had read all the other things, there were no mobs there.
Yeah.
So he didn't read everything. So he just printed, it's very long, so I don't want to bore everybody with it. But it's page 69 and 70 if anybody's interested in getting that what he did. But that's where I saw the revisionists start happening for the, it started here. This is what was happening. It started with the Supreme Court, Justice Oliver Holmes. So yeah, that was interesting because he was regarded highly, and that's all they say is he said there was mobs there. He did not say that. Basically, he did not say that at all. So whatever decision of the court may have been, it may be a hearing, but supposing here it is, they leave this part out. But supposing the alleged facts to be true, we are of the opinion that if it were before the Supreme Court of Justice, it sanctioned a situation upon which the courts in the United States should act. And they should act and declare lynch law as little valid when practiced. So that's what they're saying. But he did not read anything. He did not read the trial transcript.
No, and not only that, but you look at all the other appeals. They're just they're not for. I mean, the first one that he asked for a new trial is essentially that Leo Frank was not in the courtroom when the verdict was read, but there was a waiver by his attorneys. Anyway, we can go through this point by point. And by the way, at some point, I will get through your book. I do want to myself, kind of break down the different appeals, because the legal side of that is fun and for me, and to see what all the different problems that they were bringing up. But I have time of my own. I'm not doing this with a book. So did you break down the appeals in your book? Let me ask you that.
I just gave the timeline of them. I did purchase the Georgia Supreme Court one. And so that just made it more clear to me that he was guilty. And they knew he was. And there was, but don't ask me what former Governor Barnes is doing about it. He's trying to get a new trial here now today. So I think you need to be aware of that. So
no, tell us what the newest thing is. So you have this, by the way, a new trial.
Yes, sorry, I dropped my paperwork. I wanted to get my
once again, this is as bad. This is worse than
you can imagine.
Than the pardon thing, because this gentleman is in the ground, right? And you don't have any of the testimony. By the way, I'll go back to the Alonzo Mann stuff. So, but only to preface this, which is when you go to trial, speedy trial is a part that we have in our Constitution, right? You have a right to a speedy trial. The reason is you want the most contemporaneous testimony. The further out it is, the less you can have. Your memory is not there, right? So it's more difficult. How about 130 or whatever years we are out from the trial? Tell me about this, please.
I don't know how I don't have a good answer for that. I don't know why they're doing it.
But what are they trying to actually do?
They're trying to exonerate him for the murder of my great aunt.
With a new trial, though?
Yeah, with a new trial. Well, I've heard new trial. Remember, this is all secrecy. So let me tell you how it started so you can figure it out. So in 2019, there's a big press conference in Atlanta, and Governor Barnes, Fulton County DA Paul Howard, the ADL, the Rabbi Stephen LeBeau, and the Bremen Museum, I believe people were there, announced to the public that they are starting a conviction integrity unit to exonerate Leo Frank for the murder of Mary Phagan. Here's the killer, and they don't care. They really don't care about our family at all. They announced it on the day she was murdered.
I mean, that could be coincidental, I imagine, but you've got to have
to do that.
Or not. Yeah, geez.
Yeah, that's why my book came out in August. I was doing the same thing. I wanted it to come out at the time period that he was being lynched. So just to let them know there's another side to the story. So that's what they did. But what happened then in 2020 is that, Roy Barnes was the former Governor Barnes and the Rabbi LeBeau, and he had a group of people that he named in the newspaper. And those were the people that helped establish the conviction integrity unit. So I asked for open records for that, and they said there were none. So we'll go from there. And then in 2020, he was beaten by our famous Fulton County DA, Bonnie Willis, who has been in a lot of trouble lately.
Right.
And
what was her take on this?
Well, she never did anything about it for 5 years until 2025 in April. And they've been pushing. They said it's going to happen and all this stuff. And
so look, she may have wanted it or not, but we could all say she's incompetent. So maybe that has been helpful. So fine.
Yeah,
okay.
I don't know. I think she's in trouble, and she's got too much going on. And so when she said that in April, I sent another request for open records request, and they gave me this legalese thing that, this is still being, what's the word that they used for? I'm trying to use the legal term that they used for it, considered, or it's still in process or something like that. And I'm like, but he's dead. He's already been convicted. And they said there's no records. Now you tell me if they're going to do a new trial, and it's called the Innocence Project.
How do they do it without the records?
Well, and what are they reading, for God's sake?
Yes.
Why can't I read them? Yeah. Why did that Clark freshman kid get to read it and get all those records? And they did. Oh, by the way, the state of Georgia said that Leo Frank's were state secrets in 2020.
State secrets?
They were state secrets, and I asked for them to revoke them, and they denied me on that. That's part of the newsletters. You need to read the newsletters.
By the way, okay, so let's talk about how everyone can sign up for the newsletter. But I'll just say this: similar thing, Epstein. They literally said you can't have this because it's state secrets too. So why It's a very similar situation. How do we get a hold of your newsletter?
It's free on littlemaryphagan.com. They'll
Okay.
be on the right-hand side, I think, if they haven't changed it yet.
Okay.
And they're all there from the positions, family statement, when all this started in 2019, and I have a total of 15 to currently now. And the last one, it says it's shame on Georgia for the political, and I address it to the governor. And, you know, Fonnie Willis is being investigated by a Senate committee here in Georgia for being, what are the funds, use of funds, I don't know what she was doing that with that, but she's just in trouble. But you know, it just, you know, is anything ever going to happen? It just doesn't happen, you know. So,
Is the newsletter email? Is it physical?
You can print it out.
Okay, so it's like a PDF type of. Okay,
it's like a PDF file
Okay.
over there, and so they're all 15 of them, and it's at no cost. Like I said, but they are in the book if you want to keep them forever. So I just I throw that in there. They're an appendix. I thought they were very important so that you can see my research and what I have done to ensure that the public is aware that truth must win on the Mary Phagan case. So that's what I've done.
absolutely. And by the way, just thinking about this, which is you have a lot of pressure. ADL does lots of money. Then they do a lot of pressure campaigns. And who is pressuring on the opposite? So when the government gets, the ADL is pushing, and some rabbis are doing this, and other people, who is on the other side? It's Mary Phagan-Kean. That's it. I mean, who else, right? Do you have any kind of other groups? So, it's important for us to, I think those of us that are concerned about this. Now, look, you have, this is family. So this means a lot to you.
Yes.
To me, this is just outright, I think it's disgusting it's so obvious when you read through everything that's out there and you can see that this guy was just a predator and he was doing evil things. It went through trial. He's convicted, 13 appeals, extrajudicial killing. We're not happy about that, but that's what happened. And so I don't like the line, the gaslighting, right? To make this into something else. It's really disgusting. So that's my thing about it. And obviously you've got family, but is there any other way to, besides a newsletter, to, get people involved in any of this or to be updated with it?
Well, I guess I could put some kind of blog on the website. What do you think? Maybe say if you're interested, then we'll give you updates on it, and what's happening with the Fonnie Willis situation. She announced it during the week that parade was at Fox Theater. Of course,
that she was going to go forward with this.
Yeah, it's already on the desk. Yeah,
so I mean, it would be good that people are some way that we can all find out about it. I'll do what I can as well.
I'm going to write that down if you don't.
Okay. Yeah, because because you think about it from the politician's perspective, which is they're just getting pushing from the ADL. Okay, but is there anybody besides Mary's family that's pushing the other direction? And I think they should feel that pressure. And, when people hear this and, maybe this will help them find your book as well.
Well, X has been wonderful. I mean,
yes,
when you read X, I just was so shocked about how many thousands and thousands of views I'm getting. And most of them are very positive. Maybe there's about 4 people that have posted a negative, but, I think out of all those people, we're doing pretty good. I think they know the truth. And, the ADL made money off this case. They promoted the anti-Semitism because Leo Frank was lynched. So what's happened with the governor and the rabbi now, they used to say that he was hang the Jew or will hang you. They have quit saying that about the trial. Now it's the Vigilance Committee members, who's the governor's wife's grandfather was one of those members that were anti-Semitic. You're going to tell me that those wealthy people in Marietta, because we know who they are, and I knew who they were in '87 when I wrote the book, but my dad and I decided it was not our right to let people know because some of them did not know.
Interesting.
Yeah, we did not want them to know. We knew who some of them were. And I said, Daddy, they don't know. They don't know. He said, you're sure? I said, yeah, Daddy, they don't know. And I said, I don't think we should tell them. And he agreed that we did that, I mean, we know, that was another reaction when I would do back in the day when I signed checks and I put my name down. I swear to you, it was just so strange. Sometimes people would look at me and they go, my grandfather or my great grandfather was part of that lynch mob. And it wasn't a lynch mob. It was a vigilance committee. It was a military operation.
Yeah.
It is amazing how they did that and everything. And they were upset because Governor Slayton commuted his sentence the last day in office, and the defense attorneys were at the Capitol writing it with him. And he was a member of the law firm that defended Leo Frank.
Yeah.
And my family firmly believes he was bought.
Well,
Can't prove it, but they say they was bought. And you need to know that my family, every one of my family, most of them, I think my grandfather attended the trial every day. My grandmother did, my great-grandmother, my great-stepfather did, her sister did, was to hold up, Fanny, great-grandmother Fanny. Uncle Ben was in the Navy, but he did come home, of course, for the funeral and went to part of the trial and listened to it and couldn't take it anymore, and he walked out. So my grandfather attended, and Charles did not attend because he wanted to be with farming and stay in Marietta with his Uncle Reuben. So, I mean, my family attended the trial, and they wrote a letter in Tom Watson's magazine and said, we got to see what he did and what he looked like and how he acted.
By the way, you mentioned Tom Watson. This is
Colorful character.
Yes, exactly. Good writer and whatnot. He's got his own issues with a lot of people. Perfectly fine for him. I will say this is what I didn't realize until I started digging into it more. People don't know Tom Watson was a populist. He was a politician at some point. And he had a magazine or an article thing that he wrote there. He was a former attorney, and he was I would say he wasn't favorable to Catholics and the Jews, right? Or blacks for the most part. However, and he did a great job of breaking this trial down after the fact.
Yes.
Okay.
They insisted he was there. He was there during the trial.
Right. Right. So he did not write a word about it during the trial, and it was after the fact. So now the ADL, it's just easy to just say all these kind of comments. Hey, this guy was a outright racist and whatnot, and he's writing it. It's not what the premise. It's not what actually took place at the time.
And he says vigilance committee. And by the way, he was asked to defend Leo Frank, and he turned it down.
Interesting. Yeah.
His great grandson told me that, so I moved this around.
There are so many, and I think that we're going to need to have you come back, and then we can talk about some more stuff. Maybe just good, because you're a fascinating person, and you know so much, and you talk about X. Like I've dug into this, and people start saying things on Twitter formerly Twitter about the Leo Frank case, and I'm ready to start doing it, and I'm just like, that's and then I see what you write on there, and I was like, oh, Mary just has this down. She knows all the details, and she takes all the people on. So I love it, absolutely love it.
Thank you.
Tell us. I will put the links to your last thing. Yeah, last thing I wanted to say. It's another little fascinating thing. Jack Lemmon does a portrayal of Judge Slayton. I think that's But there's I think there was another movie where Walter Matthau plays a similar part. And, those two guys had the TV show together. Do you remember the Walter Matthau and Jack Lemmon, the TV show? Okay. Yes. So they were, what was it? I don't know. They were two single guys that lived together. It was
yes. I love that program.
Right. But Walter Matthau also was in a Leo Frank movie, like miniseries too. I'll have to find that info for you. It's just kind of a fascinating little tidbit there.
Yeah,
so.
Well, there's a lot of stuff that happened with all that, the movies and documentaries, and one thing that really cracked me up, because this also goes to the smearing of Mary Phagan, and it started in 1935 actually too, was that Lana Turner debuted Mary Phagan. She played Mary Phagan.
Oh, interesting.
Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah,
to pick her. So you see that revisionism is starting the way she looked. Of course, they had the pointed brassieres back then, So, I mean, there's just a lot of crazy things with everything on that. God, you could talk about this thing for days.
I know. Maybe we'll have to just break down like the miniseries with Jack, because I'm recalling it again there, which is I'm trying to remember the guy's name. It's a black guy that played Jim Conley, who's famous actor as well. They had him as the stereotypical, like creepy, over-sexualized black man. He's in prison, and he's almost just like, chomping at the bit. It's so ridiculous, some of the stuff Hollywood did for this thing. It's embarrassing.
Well, that's what I said. It was completely, A Little Girl Is Dead. I mean, it made up all this stuff, and it just kept going and going and going, and even the current books. And I guess I just got a little angry, to say the least.
Yeah.
And thought, they need to know how revisionism is happening with history. And this just really upsets me because I love history. And I had the best history teacher, and I'm going to mention his name, Coach Chadwick, and he's real proud of me for writing my book because he played handball with my daddy when we were in high school. So, but anyway, he taught me to love history, and but he taught me the truth. It's just really weird. And now, I didn't know if you know, but you need to know this too. The ADL in Georgia has a curriculum guide for teachers for 8th grade students that study the Leo Frank case. Now, the Mary Phagan case.
Yeah, so let's reposition it to that. Now, is that I've heard that the Steve Oney book is basically the progenitor of the curriculum in a sense. I don't know if that's in Georgia, but his book has been like the official word from the ADL. Is that correct?
He's the definitive account for the ADL.
Okay.
Yeah, but he's also the one that smears my family terribly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, we were not hillbillies, and he had little Mary working at age 10 in a cotton mill, and I laughed because I said that was my grandmother. My grandmother's name was Mary Phagan. We had 3 Mary Phagans in this family, and she said she went through some stuff. Think about, because she married my grandfather, and she was Mary Phagan, and she got the same thing. Oh, you're supposed to be dead. And she said she had a hard time with it. And I think that's why she didn't want me to write the book, because she was really worried about me when we moved back to Atlanta. And she told my daddy, she said, this is going to be hard for her if people start asking her that question and saying she's dead and stuff and all that, or that she is Mary Phagan. I did find something interesting, even though they teased me about being reincarnated. I'm having second thoughts. I believe Mary's in me. I believe her spirit's in me. And, one of the censoring, there's been a lot of censoring with this case. Flickr account was censored, and I found a postcard where little Mary wrote, and I almost had a heart attack because it's my exact handwriting.
Oh, wow. Oh.
My sister and brother just had a fit. They said, this is unbelievable. They both said, yep, she's in you. And, I couldn't have children, so, this is what I do. I do my research, and I do it like you do it. We've got to stick to the fact and the truth.
Yeah. I mean, and I'll end kind of on this, which is thinking back about Steve Oney's type of stuff, calling your family, her hillbilly. First of all, that's not material at all. It doesn't matter, but it does matter. And so why is he doing that? Well, it's easy to put things
out. It's a story. It fits the narrative. It fits the narrative better. And
it's the South. It's the South. It's hicky. It's all this kind of thing. You can't get a fair trial in Georgia. It's the South. Yet when you look at it and you see all the legal wranglings, everything that went on, these are not backward hicks. These are just people that have an accent. And by the way, Leo's down there running things. So, it's not a backwards world.
No, and that's the thing about, I just didn't understand about Steve Oney, but it just fit his narrative better. So in my book, I kind of counteract it, and I call it creative revenge. I let them know that my great-grandfather, Mary's grandfather, was very wealthy and very prominent, and he also left my grandfather an inheritance when he passed. So, and if you had seen the house, the house burnt down, but if you had seen the house that they lived in 1913, I think you would start thinking about it. That he didn't do. A lot of people were, he probably knows it, but a lot of people were disappointed in this book, and I was definitely disappointed that he portrayed our family in a negative light.
Yeah, by the way, there's your book. Like I said, there's the secret relationship between blacks and Jews. I have that one there, which I felt was.
I have that one too. I like that book.
I did. It's fascinating. And by the way, I went then and bought the second version, and that's one I used a lot for that last episode that you had seen me, which is the relationship. I wanted to understand Jews and the KKK and slavery in the South from Civil War between the states up and through the 1960s, right? And so that one I was able to kind of see that there wasn't this animosity between the two. And so that narrative, it's important to kind of look back at that and see that narrative breaks down if you use historical context. And then once again, that's a Steve Oney and any of these things. We have to look back at the time. What were these people going through? Why was it important that Jim Conley was, testifying? Why was it important that Leo Frank shouldn't think that a black man should ever make an accusation against him? You shouldn't believe him. And how dare you even think that I would, murder this girl when there's a black man in the vicinity? So
and
these are important.
He stated that in the newspapers, by the way. He said no white man did this crime. It was
he said this is an N-word crime is what they basically.
No, he said what they said, even in the court, the defense lawyer said lying, filthy, drunken, something N-word, that N-word.
Right.
In court.
All right. It was, by the way, going through these different books, there's one of they break down just context at the time, once again, a judge with a bunch of black people coming before him, and, the judge is just calling the N-word constantly. So that's just, and even, you see it on the transcript, it says colored in parentheses. Yes. So anyway, there we have it. Mary, appreciate it. Lovely getting to talk to you. Sorry about the context of what we're talking about, but it's awesome that you're doing what you're doing. Any last things you want to put out for this, or let us know, and also where they can find all your information?
Most of the information is on littlemaryphagan.com. I also have all the original newspapers on there. I have the brief of evidence. I have all the trial records. I think we're working on, right now, what we're doing is any funds that I make from this book, it's not coming to me. It is going to the Mary Phagan-Kean Legacy Project, where I will transcribe all the Supreme Court records, the Georgia Supreme Court records, which puts a final nail on the coffin for those that Leo Frank is not guilty. So we're doing that now. We've got about 800 more to go, but we're doing it, and it's going to be easy, so you can search for it. So if you want to search the word colored or the N-word or whatever, you can do it now. We're really going on it full time. And this is a legacy that I want to have for that when I pass, that there's no question, there's no doubt that the Mary Phagan case really is important for the truth being told and not to distort history. And you must use historical resources, and that's what you did. And that's why I was impressed with you when you were on that one podcast that I saw. I couldn't believe it. I was like, God, he's got it.
That warms my heart, actually. So I got from one of the guys, they sent me the message you had sent over there. So I really appreciate that. I don't know how you even found that podcast. I mean, they're blowing up, so it's good for that. So I appreciate that. And once again, appreciate you coming on here.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yes. And so we will plan another one to come back, because I think it's important. By the way, this maybe is a good thing that you're doing here, which is, AI, right? There's a problem with Grok and ChatGPT. When you talk about Leo Frank and Mary Phagan, they pull up crap from the ADL. Maybe the fact that you're putting this and archiving it on your website is going to help this algorithm, so that they start pulling from original sources and they get the actual information, and then it just blows the doors off of the other people's comments.
Well, Wikipedia is horrible.
Yeah, completely.
And I'm sure Grok is going to be the same way. I have no doubt that they're not ready yet.
No. Anyway, I appreciate you coming on.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yes, I'm going to do an outro here. If you want to hang out, we can talk a little bit. Everybody, I hope you have a good weekend. Don't forget to subscribe. Just again, go to littlemaryphagan.com. I'm on Substack, or tyleryankee.substack.com, and we will see you guys next week. Yeah.
Whose broad stripes and bright stars
is it? Never mind.